The suspect has stopped. We're at the end of the 90 freeway.
At 6 a.m., as Los Angeles slowly woke up, federal agents moved into position, prepared for one of the largest and most sophisticated drug busts the city had ever seen. The streets, congested with rush hour traffic, appeared as any ordinary morning. Yellow cabs, seen in their familiar colors, merged with the other vehicles on the road, ferrying passengers to their destinations, unaware that their drivers were unknowingly part of a massive criminal operation. To the average commuter, everything seemed routine. Yet in the shadows, a massive law enforcement operation was about to unfold. In a synchronized move, 800 agents from the DEA, FBI, and local law enforcement agencies hit the streets. 500 unsuspecting yellow cabs that were scattered across the city. These cabs, operated by innocent drivers, were the backbone of a secret cartel smuggling ring that had been operating under the radar for years. The federal teams were ready, prepared for a complex raid that would expose the dark underbelly of Los Angeles' transportation industry. The operation was far from a simple raid. As agents in unmarked vehicles surrounded the taxis, the chaos erupted instantly. Drivers were ordered to pull over, passengers were escorted out of the vehicles, and confusion swept through the streets. Federal agents were moving quickly, and the tension in the air was palpable. The drivers, many of whom had been working long shifts, had no idea why they were being stopped. Some thought it might be a routine inspection, while others feared an immigration sweep. But this was not an ordinary check. Federal agents weren't looking for expired permits or license violations. They were hunting for something much more dangerous. As agents moved from one taxi to the next, the realization began to settle in. These vehicles, these innocent-looking cabs, were part of a much larger, far-reaching operation. While drivers were left confused on the sidewalks, officers were uncovering hidden compartments within the vehicles. These cabs, which were supposed to be transporting passengers, were instead transporting something far more deadly: fentanyl, cocaine, and methamphetamine, all carefully concealed beneath the seats, behind panels, and within walls designed to evade detection. The hidden compartments weren't thrown together haphazardly. They were professional engineering feats, designed specifically to evade both traditional detection methods and high-tech equipment. Lead lining, perfectly sealed compartments, and hidden sections within the vehicle chassis kept the drugs hidden from prying eyes. It was a network built on the premise that the drivers, by being completely unaware, would never suspect that their cabs were being used to smuggle massive amounts of narcotics. Subscribe to Military Power to follow this story, because what was uncovered before dawn may signal a much larger battle still unfolding. The cartel behind this operation wasn't interested in running a legitimate taxi service. 5 years ago, they had quietly purchased Yellow Cab, not to provide transportation, but to use the fleet as a covert distribution system. Their strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. The cabs passed regular inspections, the drivers followed standard routes, and nothing ever seemed out of place. The cartel's goal was clear: to move drugs through the city with as little interference as possible, hidden in plain sight. What appeared to be an ordinary legal business was actually a sophisticated cover for one of the largest drug trafficking networks in Los Angeles. But it wasn't just the cab company's modification of the vehicles that made this operation so dangerous. It was the unwitting involvement of the drivers. The men and women behind the wheel had no idea they were transporting kilos of illicit drugs each day. They thought they were just doing their job, taking passengers to the airport or downtown hotels. They passed background checks and were given their routes by what they assumed were legitimate dispatchers. Each day, they made their rounds, picking up passengers, dropping them off, completely unaware that they were helping facilitate one of the most extensive smuggling operations the city had ever seen. The breakthrough in the case came not from a tip-off, but from something much smaller: a weight discrepancy in one of the taxis. A DEA agent working undercover had spent months driving for Yellow Cab, blending in as just another driver. One evening, after completing a routine run, he checked the weight of his vehicle and found it was significantly lighter than it should have been. This single detail was the key that unlocked the whole operation. It was the moment that everything changed. What had appeared to be a simple mistake, a small anomaly, turned out to be the first piece in the puzzle of an intricate criminal network. The discovery of the weight discrepancy was the catalyst that set the investigation in motion. It led the agents to dig deeper, utilizing all their resources to uncover the full scope of the cartel's operation. For months, undercover agents, advanced surveillance technology, and informants worked together to piece together the operation. They followed leads, tracked the cabs, and gathered intelligence on the network's inner workings. The agents knew that if they moved too quickly, the cartel would scatter, but they also knew they couldn't wait forever. The evidence was mounting, and they had to act. The operation took a dangerous turn when the DEA deployed high-tech X-ray vans along major taxi depots and at critical locations like LAX airport. These vans were disguised as maintenance vehicles, but inside, they were scanning each and every passing cab. The results were staggering. More than 300 cabs out of the 500 were found to have hidden compartments that were used to transport drugs. The scale of the operation was beyond anything the authorities had initially imagined. What the authorities had uncovered was a network that had been carefully constructed over years. The cartel's ability to disguise its operation behind the legitimate yellow cab company was a testament to the ingenuity and ruthlessness of those involved, but the cracks were starting to show. The raid was set in motion, and the agents were ready to close in. As the authorities prepared for the final stage of the operation, the question remained: how would they stop the 500 cabs spread across the city without alerting the cartel? A traditional raid would never work. The drivers would radio the dispatchers, who would warn the rest of the fleet, and the drugs would vanish without a trace. They needed something more. And that's when they brought in the FBI's cyber division. Their plan was audacious. Instead of targeting the cabs themselves, they would seize control of the entire dispatch system. At the exact moment the raid began, every single driver would hear the same voice over their radio, not from their dispatcher, but from a federal agent. This was the final, crucial move that would turn the tide in the operation. With the stage set, agents from all over the country gathered for the final briefing. The tension was palpable. As the sun began to rise, the agents knew that they were about to strike a blow against one of the most dangerous drug networks in the United States. And in that moment, the fate of 500 cabs, hundreds of drivers, and the cartel itself would be sealed. The agents knew that the success of the operation rested on one critical moment: the inspection of the taxis. The raid had already caused enough chaos, but the real challenge lay ahead. The question wasn't whether the drugs were in the cabs. It was about how to expose them without alerting the cartel. The cabs had been modified with hidden compartments, so expertly engineered that they seemed to be ordinary vehicles from the outside. The only way to truly confirm what lay inside was to use technology, to see what couldn't be seen with the naked eye. To accomplish this, the DEA deployed specialized X-ray vans, disguised as regular city maintenance vehicles. These vans were designed to scan the vehicles passing through key points, particularly at the taxi depots and near major transit hubs like LAX. The idea was simple. While the taxis went about their usual routes, the vans would covertly scan them, revealing any hidden compartments without raising suspicion. As the taxis began to pass, the agents in the X-ray vans watched the monitors closely. Each vehicle that drove by left a faint, ghostly image on the screen. But these images were far more revealing than the taxis themselves. There, beneath the ordinary exterior of the vehicles, agents could see dark, rectangular shadows, clear signs of hidden spaces that didn't belong. They weren't just gaps in the vehicle structure, these were purpose-built compartments expertly welded into the chassis. The compartments were lined with lead to block detection, and every single one of the 340 taxis flagged on the screen confirmed what they'd suspected. The cartel had been using these vehicles to transport massive quantities of narcotics across Los Angeles. Each of the 340 taxis had its own story. Some had drugs hidden behind the seats, others behind door panels. The cartel had made sure that their modifications were subtle but effective. The design of these compartments was so advanced that even the most sophisticated scanners wouldn't have picked up the drugs without direct involvement from agents on the ground. But now, with the X-ray vans revealing the hidden compartments, the agents knew they had what they needed to proceed. The DEA's plan had always relied on careful precision. They couldn't just stop any cab, they needed to stop them all. If they arrested a single driver, it would tip off the rest of the fleet. The entire operation depended on keeping the cartel leaders in the dark until the last possible moment. They needed to take out the entire network, and they needed to do it fast. That's when the DEA executed their masterstroke. They seized control of Yellow Cab's dispatch system. With this bold move, they ensured that every single taxi would be stopped at exactly the same time, with no way for the cartel to warn any drivers in advance. The plan was risky, but it was the only way to make sure the drugs didn't disappear the moment one taxi was stopped. At exactly 6 a.m., as the first rays of light broke over Los Angeles, the agents moved in. The air was thick with tension, and the streets were lined with federal SUVs, all converging on the taxis. Within minutes, 500 vehicles were brought to a halt, one by one. Drivers were told to pull over and step out of their cabs. But what the drivers didn't know was that they were the ones being detained, not as criminals, but as victims of a ruthless exploitation scheme. They had unwittingly become pawns in a massive drug smuggling operation. The scale of the bust was staggering. As the agents continued to check each cab, they uncovered more and more drugs. The hidden compartments, once thought to be nothing more than clever modifications, were now exposed as the tools of a criminal empire. The cabs had been modified to carry nearly 10 tons of narcotics, with fentanyl, methamphetamine, and cocaine stashed inside. In total, the operation seized 6.8 tons of drugs, worth an estimated $340 million on the street. This wasn't just another drug bust. It was one of the largest drug seizures in U.S. history, and the scale of the operation was nothing short of terrifying. The cartel had figured out how to move their products right under the noses of the authorities, using one of the most unsuspecting transportation methods, taxis. But now, the law had caught up with them. As agents continued to process the seized vehicles, they began to piece together the full extent of the cartel's operations. It became clear that this was more than just a smuggling operation. It was a well-oiled machine, operating in plain sight. The drivers had been hired as legitimate workers, passing background checks and operating within the rules of the company. They didn't suspect anything was wrong. But now, as the drugs were uncovered and the scale of the operation became clear, it was evident that the cartel had manipulated the system to its advantage. The success of the operation was a huge blow to the cartel, but the fight wasn't over. The next challenge was taking down the leadership, the people who had orchestrated this entire operation from behind the scenes. The DEA's focus shifted to the company's executives, who had used their legitimate business as a front for their illegal activities. These individuals were arrested, and their assets were seized, but the true victory came in knowing that the drugs were off the streets. By the end of the day, the impact of the raid was felt across the entire city. It wasn't just about the drugs that had been seized, it was about the message it sent. The authorities had proven that they could infiltrate even the most well-hidden networks, exposing criminals who had thought they were untouchable. And while the drivers were released, their involvement in the operation remained a grim reminder of the lengths to which the cartel would go to carry out its operations. The final tally of the drugs seized was a sobering number: 6.8 tons of fentanyl, meth, and cocaine, enough to flood the streets of Los Angeles with deadly narcotics. The impact of this bust would be felt for years to come, not only because of the scale of the drugs seized, but also because it exposed the sophisticated nature of modern criminal enterprises. The cartel's ability to hide in plain sight, using a trusted transportation company as a cover, had been shattered. And with this operation, the DEA had dealt a major blow to the network. As the last of the cabs were processed and the streets returned to their usual chaos, the question remained: how many other networks like this one were out there, waiting to be uncovered? And how much further could law enforcement go to ensure that these networks were stopped before they could do even more damage? The full weight of the operation came down hard on the cartel. As the chaos of the early morning raid settled, law enforcement turned their focus to the masterminds behind the entire scheme. The leaders of the drug network, including the CEO of Yellow Cab, had thought they could hide behind the legitimate business of running a well-known taxi company. They believed their ability to blend into the city's transportation landscape would keep them safe. But they underestimated the precision of the law enforcement operation that had just unfolded. Carlos Mendez, the CEO of Yellow Cab, sat in his office, unaware that his world was about to crumble. By the time the DEA and FBI stormed the headquarters, the damage was already done. Agents poured into the corporate building, bursting through doors, seizing documents, and confiscating digital evidence. Mendez was one of the first to be arrested, his face pale as the agents led him away in handcuffs. The investigators had already pieced together how he had used the legitimate transportation company as a front for the cartel's operations. He, along with several other key members of the cartel, had orchestrated the covert distribution of narcotics throughout the city. The legal system wasted no time in bringing those responsible to justice. Despite the defense's efforts to argue that the leadership had been unaware of the full extent of the operations, the evidence was overwhelming. The cartel had used Yellow Cab as a tool for transporting massive amounts of drugs, hiding them in plain sight within modified taxis. The prosecution's case was airtight, and the jury delivered swift convictions. Mendez, along with his top associates, faced a slew of charges: drug trafficking, conspiracy, and the systematic exploitation of employees. What followed was a powerful message to criminal enterprises operating in plain sight. The judicial system showed no mercy to those who thought they could mask their illegal activities behind the veneer of legitimate businesses. The sentencing was severe. Carlos Mendez received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, while his associates were sentenced to decades in prison. The sentence sent a loud and clear signal to other would-be criminals hiding behind seemingly legitimate operations. No one is untouchable. The aftermath of the raid was not just about the arrests and the convictions, it was also about the dismantling of the entire network. The DEA and FBI knew that taking down the leadership was only part of the operation. They also had to ensure that the business infrastructure that had allowed the cartel to thrive was permanently destroyed. In this case, it meant shutting down Yellow Cab for good. The company, which had once been a trusted part of Los Angeles' transportation system, was now a symbol of how criminals can exploit legitimate enterprises for their own gain. As the dust settled, law enforcement moved to seize Yellow Cab's assets. The company's fleet of 500 modified taxis was sold for scrap, and the business license was permanently revoked. All property connected to the operation, including real estate and financial holdings, was seized. It was a massive blow to the cartel's ability to continue operating under a facade of legality. The company's closure marked the end of an era for the cartel. The once thriving transportation business was now a ghost of its former self, with nothing left but remnants of its criminal past. This outcome was a rare and powerful example of how law enforcement can use legal means to dismantle entire criminal networks hiding behind legitimate businesses. It wasn't just the drugs that had been seized, but the very infrastructure that had enabled the cartel to carry out its operations undetected for so long. The government's ability to target the root of the problem and shut down the business that was the lifeblood of the cartel was a monumental victory in the war on drugs. But the closure of Yellow Cab was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning of the ripple effects that would follow. The loss of this front business had a profound impact on the cartel's operations, forcing them to reevaluate their methods and seek new ways to smuggle drugs into the city. The cartels were learning the hard way that no business, no matter how legitimate it may seem, is immune to the reach of law enforcement when the resources and will to act are there. The next question was how the cartel would adapt to this setback. While Yellow Cab was gone, it was clear that this would not be the last battle. The operation had dealt a significant blow to their operations, but as law enforcement experts know, drug cartels are resilient. They may regroup, reassess, and find new ways to carry out their illegal activities. What remained certain was that this victory would not be forgotten. It would serve as a lesson to those who sought to operate in the shadows. There is no safe haven for criminal networks. With the raid and the subsequent seizures, the impact on the drug cartel was significant. Their ability to use a trusted business as a front had been completely shattered, sending a powerful message to criminal enterprises everywhere. But with the loss of Yellow Cab, the cartel's leadership would have to adjust, and the battle was far from over. The raid on Yellow Cab has revealed one of the most sophisticated drug smuggling networks in California, highlighting the immense scale and far-reaching impact of the operation. For years, the cartel had operated under the radar, using the facade of a trusted transportation company to conceal their illegal activities. The success of the operation not only exposed the scale of their network, but also demonstrated the seriousness and commitment of law enforcement agencies in their ongoing battle against drug-related crime. This operation was no small feat. The collaboration between the DEA, FBI, and local law enforcement was crucial in bringing down a cartel that had carefully disguised itself behind a legitimate business. The strategic use of technology, undercover agents, and precise coordination ensured that the operation was executed flawlessly. The seizure of 6.8 tons of drugs, worth $340 million, and the dismantling of the Yellow Cab empire sent a strong message. No matter how clever the tactics or how well hidden the operation, law enforcement will relentlessly pursue and dismantle criminal networks wherever they may hide. The closure of Yellow Cab and the arrest of its leadership is a victory for the law, but it also raises important questions about the future. Are there other networks operating under the guise of legitimate businesses? Will drug cartels continue to find ways to exploit legal industries to further their illegal agendas? This raid serves as a reminder that while progress is being made, the war on drugs is far from over. The impact of this operation will resonate far beyond Los Angeles, signaling that law enforcement is ready to strike at the heart of criminal enterprises hiding in plain sight. What do you think about this massive raid? Do you think other drug trafficking networks are still operating under legal businesses? Subscribe to Military Power to stay updated on future stories like this.